lot of Alien fans, I'm really excited to watch Alien Romulus when it comes out in a couple of weeks. It's one of my most anticipated films of the year. I can't wait to see the Xenomorphs on the big screen again. I can't wait to see Kaylee Spaney in a Ripley-esque role. I can't wait to be transported back to the terrifying vacuum of space where no one can hear me scream. And I loved Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead and Don't Breathe, so I'm intrigued to see his take on an Alien film. Romulus looks like it's going back to the franchise's roots as a pure horror film. This won't be an action film with some jump scares like Aliens, or a lofty sci-fi meditation on human existence with some gore like Prometheus. Much like the 1979 Ridley Scott masterpiece that started it all, it'll be a full-blown horror movie. It looks like it'll be a slasher in space, with a group of likable young adults being picked off one by an unstoppable killer. And that seems like a great direction for the series to take, back to basics. Unless it just has really good marketing and it's actually a terrible movie, Alien Romulus is shaping up to be a return to form for the Alien franchise. And that return to form has been a long time coming, because this franchise hasn't been on form since 1986. And even then, it still wasn't able to outdo Scott's original Alien.
Get away from her, you bitch!
When James Cameron was hired to come up with a sequel to Alien, he knew he couldn't make a horror film as effective as Scott's, and that even if he did, Scott would get the credit. So he pivoted to a different genre. Cameron pitted a band of space marines against a festering hive filled with dozens of xenomorphs and delivered one of the greatest sequels ever made, Aliens. Aliens has a really intense atmosphere, a rich emotional storyline with Ripley taking Newt under her wing as a surrogate daughter, and its entire second half is a non-stop, high-octane thrill ride. It wasn't as fine a film as the Ridley Scott original, but it was a worthy addition to it, and it managed to maintain the same unsettling tone while doing something completely different. It seemed like the franchise had a bright future, with different filmmakers exploring different ideas and putting their own stamp on this universe. And then it all started to go downhill.
In 1992, we would discover on Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
After the blockbuster success of Cameron's sequel, Fox were naturally eager to get Alien 3 off the ground. They hired David Fincher to direct Alien 3 as his first feature, and Fincher ironically ended up getting the same treatment that Cameron got on his first feature, Piranha 2. The producers brought in a visionary young filmmaker with his own ideas for where to take the franchise, then used his services as a glorified babysitter for the crew while they took complete control of the project.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
Alien 3 serves you a shit sandwich in the first few seconds. The opening scene reveals that Newt, Hicks, and Bishop have all died horrifically off-screen in between films, making their triumphs at the end of Aliens completely meaningless.
He's dead. What? He died last night. Are you joking?
No.
A man died. You're smiling.
I'm not smiling.
An alien film directed by David Fincher, set on a prison planet full of convicts who are just as cruel and monstrous and bloodthirsty as the Xenomorphs, sounds like a bloody good movie. And it probably would have been if the studio hadn't wrestled creative control away from Fincher and turned it into the steaming turd that they, for some reason, wanted to make. And if that wasn't bad enough, the fourth film, Alien Resurrection, was even worse. The studio realized Sigourney Weaver was as much of a draw for this franchise as the aliens themselves. So after killing off Ripley in Alien 3, they brought back Weaver to play a clone of Ripley in Alien Resurrection. It's a pretty apt metaphor for the film itself. Alien Resurrection has all the genetic material of an alien movie, but it's just a hollow imitation of one. Alien Resurrection does have one great underwater action sequence, I'll give it that, and that sequence seems to be getting homaged in Romulus. But aside from that one cool underwater scene, Alien Resurrection is a miserable failure. After that, the Fox executives who seemed determined to tank this franchise came up with the bright idea for a Frankenstein meets the Wolfman style crossover called Alien vs. Predator. The first Alien vs. Predator film is actually pretty good. It doesn't have the command of tension that Scott or Cameron's films had, and it certainly doesn't hit on any emotional level, but it delivers all the monster movie thrills promised by its title. The same can't be said for the sequel, Aliens vs. Predator Requiem, which is badly lit, badly edited, badly titled, and completely and utterly uninspired. Requiem was so bad that it took Ridley Scott himself returning to the Alien franchise to drag it out of rock bottom. Scott decided that we needed a whole movie, nay, a whole trilogy of movies, to explain the backstory of how the Xenomorphs were created. Frankly, I don't think they needed to have been created at all. Can't they just exist? I don't know about you, but for me, the Xenomorph is such an effective movie monster because it's a mysterious killing machine that's just lurking out there in the boundless depths of space. It represents how little we know about the universe and how powerless we are in the grand scheme of things. If you tell a whole story about the engineers who created them to be humanity's mortal enemy, it completely undermines them. But whatever, that's what Ridley set out to do with Prometheus. I really admire the ambition of Prometheus, and it has some great isolated sequences like Elizabeth Shaw's self-abortion. But none of that can change the fact that we just didn't need a Xenomorph origin story. And for a crack team of astronauts, the characters all make really stupid decisions, like running straight ahead while a narrow thing is falling from the sky over their heads, running straight into its path like they have a death wish. After Prometheus was met with a mixed response, Scott relented and retooled the next chapter of his Xenomorph origin trilogy into a more straightforward haunted house in space film like the original. I have to admit, I have a bit of a soft spot for Alien Covenant. Catherine Waterston is great as Ripley 2.0, Michael Fassbender gives an amazing dual performance as the yin and yang of AI, and I love anything with Danny McBride.
God, I go to church every goddamn Sunday! You gonna bring the demons out of me?
And I was so happy when Scott decided to go back to the franchise's horror roots with his follow-up to Prometheus. But in the cold light of day, I'd probably take something ambitious and new that I don't love, like Prometheus, over a pale imitation of something I do love, like Alien Covenant. Alien Covenant is just a generic sci-fi horror movie that plays like any of the dozens of Alien rip-offs that have tried and failed to recapture its genius. It's like Scott unlearned a lot of the lessons he taught Hollywood with the groundbreaking original Alien. Whereas the original Alien has an airtight script and a razor-sharp command of tension, Covenant has a really clunky and disjointed script, and favors gratuitous gore over Hitchcockian suspense. Having said all that though, I do think Alien Covenant ends on an incredible twist. Of course, that twist would go nowhere because Covenant would disappoint at the box office, Fox would be sold to Disney, and then Disney would take its own crack at revitalizing the Alien franchise. And that brings us back to Alien Romulus, Disney's first attempt to cash in on the Alien IP. And honestly, as excited as I am, I'm also trying to temper my expectations. This franchise has given us exactly 0 reasons to get hyped about a new installment for decades now. The best I'm hoping for is a really scary, really gripping movie that finds a few new and exciting ways to use the Alien iconography. Alien is a franchise like Star Wars or Terminator, where every single film since the second one has been playing for third place. The first 2 are so perfect that any subsequent film would be lucky to be a runner-up for the top 3 spot. There are some people who would say Aliens is better than the original Alien, and that's the one to beat, and I can see where they're coming from. Aliens is about as great as a sequel can be. It's bigger, ballsier, and more badass than the original. It's the first Alien on steroids, but does that make it better? I find Aliens more emotionally engaging than Alien because of the mother-daughter relationship between Ripley and Newt. Cameron definitely gives Weaver a lot more to do dramatically, and she ended up earning an Oscar nomination for it, and deservingly so. But overall, I still think Scott's original Alien is the finer film. You can't fault a single frame in Alien. It's as close to perfect as a movie can get. Scott has an unparalleled command of tension from beginning to end. Aliens is more like the Wild Bunch. It's really messy, and that's part of its charm. I'd be very surprised if Alien Romulus is able to top Aliens as a visceral big screen experience, but I know for a fact that it won't top the original Alien as a nail-biting Hitchcockian suspense thriller in space. Even if it's the best Alien sequel since Aliens, which wouldn't be saying much, there's no way it can top Scott's original film because we're in a totally different cinematic landscape, where a big studio with a lot of money on the line would never allow a film like Alien to get made. The first half of Alien requires a lot of patience from the audience, and it's a level of patience that studios don't think audiences have anymore. But I happen to have first-hand evidence that they do, because I watched Alien on the big screen with a huge crowd a few months ago and it went over like gangbusters. But as TikTok and Quibi have eroded the average attention span, studios have developed a habit of kicking off their stories as quickly as possible. There's no way a big-budget studio film would get made today that starts off as slow as Alien. In most cases, I think this shift towards kicking things off nice and early has been for the best. If you look at a really egregious example of 20th century pacing, like Trading Places, where Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd don't trade places until we've sat through like an hour of needless plot setup, then you'll appreciate the rapid-paced first act of a modern blockbuster like Deadpool and Wolverine. Wolverine. But Alien's patient pacing is one of its greatest assets. Scott really takes his time to immerse us in this world and get to know these characters. There's no horror whatsoever for the first half of the film. It's dedicated entirely to planting us in this grungy vision of the future and introducing the crew of the Nostromo. It builds out their personalities and their relationships and shows them to be lovable and relatable characters. They're not space marines or genius physicists, they're just a bunch of regular people. They're the futuristic intergalactic equivalent of ice road truckers. In a horror landscape where a priest gets his skull impaled in the opening scene of The First Omen, the beginning of Alien undoubtedly feels slow-paced by today's standards. But that patient pacing enhances the horror. When that priest gets impaled in The First Omen, we're disgusted and horrified, but it doesn't have much impact beyond that because we don't know who this priest is, so it's hard to care. Alien, on the other hand, lays all the necessary groundwork to make you care about the characters before horrible, gruesome stuff starts happening to them. By the time a bloodthirsty alien starts picking them off, we know who all these people are, we're invested in their lives, and we care about them. Plenty of other horror films get to the killing faster. Alien Romulus will surely get to the killing faster. But in those movies that rush to the most exciting part, you're not emotionally invested in any of the characters, so you don't really care if they live or die. Obviously, I can't speak to Alien Romulus because it's not out yet, but Thanksgiving, Scream 6, and the 2022 Texas Chainsaw are all guilty of this. And that last one was actually written and produced by Fede Alvarez, so I'd bet good money that Alien Romulus will have the same problem. In all those films I listed, no matter how well executed the violence is, it doesn't have much emotional impact because we don't really know the characters as human beings, so we don't really care about them as human beings. But in Alien, you actually get to know those people, so you actively want them to survive. Except Ash, fuck him. By taking the time to show the characters as real people with real lives and real relationships, Alien makes the whole ordeal with the Xenomorph, where they're getting slaughtered one at a time by nature's perfect killing machine, a million times more tense and compelling. Another reason why Alien is head and shoulders above the other Alien films, and head and shoulders above the majority of the horror genre, is that it all feels totally real. As much as I adore Aliens, I'm never under any illusion that any of it is real. I'm always aware that I'm watching a Hollywood spectacle. But Alien feels like you could be watching a documentary. Much like William Friedkin with The Exorcist, Scott took a familiar supernatural concept, a killer alien as opposed to a demonic spirit, and managed to ground it all in a tangible reality, which made the horror so much more effective. A big part of that realism is the used future aesthetic. Alien, like Star Wars, pushed back against the clean, polished look of most futuristic sci-fi at the time, and went completely the other way, where everything is dirty and grimy and battered, and the technology looks old and janky. Another major contributing factor in the realism of Alien, perhaps the biggest contributing factor, is the beautifully naturalistic acting from the ensemble cast. And Alien really is an ensemble piece. The sequels would focus squarely on Ripley as the lead, with everyone else existing in her orbit, but the first film is a true ensemble piece. Every character has equal footing in Alien, at least until they die. No one is more important than anyone else. And everyone knows a version of these people in the real world. Tom Skerritt is the cool boss, John Hurt is the affable guy who everyone likes, Yaphet Kotto is the grump who complains about everything. Every death has maximum impact because none of the characters are expendable, but the plot treats them as if they are. Sigourney Weaver's turn as Ripley helped to blaze the trail for female action heroes, although it's worth clarifying that she wasn't actually the first woman to do it, she was just the first white woman to do it, but that tends to be who gets the credit. Ripley is a hardened badass by the end of the film, but Weaver introduces her as an everywoman. She has a good head on her shoulders, and she's often the only character making sense, but she's just an average person. Throughout the film, she transforms into the badass she needs to be to survive a scrape with the specter of death. The same transformation captured just as spectacularly by Linda Hamilton in the first Terminator. Weaver would promptly become the star of the ensuing franchise, but in the original Alien, she's just one part in a stacked ensemble cast whose performances are just as authentic and lifelike. Veronica Cartwright makes Lambert's fear and turmoil feel as real as Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Harry Dean Stanton is doing his Harry Dean Stanton magic trick of being really understated and really expressive at the same time. Scott shoots the conversations between the crew in long, unbroken takes, with a handful of characters included in the frame, capturing every subtle detail of their interactions and their body language. These characters are hurtling through space with an alien on board, but their hangout dialogue scenes have the same ring of verisimilitude seen in Diner or Dazed and Confused. This sense of realism goes a long way. If the characters feel real and the environment feels real, then when an alien shows up and starts ripping them all to shreds, that's gonna feel pretty fucking real too. The term jump scare is often thrown around with negative connotations, whereas a master like David Lynch or Guillermo del Toro will meticulously collate every aspect of the filmmaking process to cultivate a disturbing atmosphere, a lesser horror director will just have monsters jump out at you, punctuated by a harsh violin stroke. And that's a valid criticism, because when they're done in a lazy fashion, jump scares can be the death of a horror movie. These kinds of jump scares can certainly be seen in the later Alien films, like the shower attack in Covenant, but an effective jump scare has nothing to do with the jump itself, it's all about the build-up to the jump. Look at Carrie's hand bursting from her grave at the end of Carrie, or the homeless guy popping out behind the Winkies in Mulholland Drive. These jumps frighten the bejesus out of you because the director has been gradually building the dread and the suspense for a few minutes before you finally get the release of the jump. The art of it is to get you to expect it. You know it's coming, but it still catches you by surprise. Dallas's death in Alien is a perfect example of this kind of jump scare. We know Dallas is trapped in a confined space and the alien is closing in on him, but we can't see it. Dallas and the approaching alien are represented by two blips on a screen, one getting closer and closer to the other. This little graphic is a very simple but very effective way to build suspense right up to the moment that the alien pounces.
Good lord, it's coming up right behind him. What's it? Look! Look!
Oh, and it's just a little thing, but I really love the plot point of the acid blood in the first Alien movie, and it's been kind of brushed off in all the sequels. In the first Alien, one drop of that acidic blood could doom everyone as it drips through the hull and threatens to rip a hole through the outside of the ship. It's a great source of tension, it has you on the edge of your seat while they're basically just going downstairs one floor at a time. But for some reason the sequels have never really bothered with it. This concept is handing you tension on a silver platter, how can you fools ignore it? It's like if the Quiet Place sequels had all ignored the fact that the aliens have very sensitive hearing. Hopefully, if nothing else, Alien Romulus can bring the acid blood back. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.